Hey everybody, it's the Breakfast Club, and I am Serious Mind. Well, this is my third take because I won't get into it. Stupid things have happened. Anyway, thanks to everybody. The topic this week was the age gap. What can we do about it? Can we do anything about it? Should we do anything about it? So we had some really good responses. I especially want to thank JJ Talks because she is the only young person on the panel right now. So we needed somebody to represent that because I think having a discussion about the age gap without any kind of representative of the young people would have been pretty poor. Certainly would have been incomplete. It would be like having a panel on women's rights and not having any women on it. So, although it's not quite that stark. Because obviously we're talking, it's a two-way street here with ageism, as Paul pointed out. But anyway, yeah, I really appreciate you, JJ, stepping up. Especially want to thank you because I know you were feeling a little tender last week. I know I was somebody who didn't really respond to your topic. So if you had felt like you didn't want to respond, I certainly would understood. So I'm really glad you chose to participate. So I appreciate that. So yeah, I want to say, I think JJ hit on something really important, is that people tend to marginalize and put down younger people, and Paul followed up on that. It's true. I remember when I was young, same thing. I mean, basically until I hit about 30, I'd always get people, oh, you're just a baby, and which was so condescending and so insulting, because especially from anyone who wasn't all that bright, because I'm a pretty smart guy, and dealing with people who were half my IQ telling me that I'm just a baby was really infuriating. And of course, if you act out or say anything, then you're just being immature, right? So, so I appreciate what you're saying. I think that's something that we all could do a better job at. I know I could do a better job at. I think of times when I've got, lost my temper and just flown off the handle. And it just wasn't helpful. But I have to say, though, I am, and so I think part of the problem is that, when we get older, we tend to forget what it was like to be young. Paul talked about how he raised his kids, and I thought it was really great. He had a really great attitude. But unfortunately, I think what he said is not common, or certainly not common enough. Because I think when we get older, as I mentioned last time, our brains tend to get less flexible, more rigid, more brittle. And so we get set in our ways. And part of what happens, particularly if we have children, and if we don't have that kind of really great attitude that Paul expressed, we go into protect mode. So, we don't want our kids to fail. We don't want them to get hurt or, and all that. So, when we start getting too protective, and so we have this mentality, oh, my child, and we think, oh, baby, And I didn't have any children of my own. I had stepkids, but when I met them, they were older, they were like high school age. So it's not really the same thing. So I have a kind of a different mindset from most people who have kids, but I think a lot of people they can't help but see their child as a baby or as a very, very young person, and regardless of how old they get, how mature they are, how intelligent they are. I ran into the same thing as a kid. I remember in college, I was raised by my grandparents, and they would talk, wax poetically about how smart I was to everybody and brag about me, and then turn around and treat me like I was 5. I remember a number of arguments when I was in college about how they always wanted to know, where I was and who I was with and what I was doing when I would come home for a weekend or for spring break or something, until I finally politely reminded them that when I was in college, they had no idea any of those things, and they seemed to get by fine. And that it really shouldn't make a difference, and they should trust me a bit more than they did, and that helped. Things got somewhat better, but even then, I was still Joey, and they still, it was a struggle for them. So I do remember that, and so I think that's important that when we deal with younger people, you remember that, especially when they're adults, because millennials now we're really talking really 18, 20 through like 36. So we're not talking teeny boppers here anymore. So we really have to realize these are fully grown adults with their own ideas, and it's hard sometimes. Um, Now, on the flip side, I do have some concerns. I have real serious concerns about millennials, and part of that is some of the things I've read and some of the things I've encountered myself. One of the things I read recently, a few articles about how millennials are substantially less, or sorry, substantially more risk averse than Gen X was at the same age and baby boomers were at the same age. And that has me somewhat concerned. I mean, it's funny because for years, we always, when parents are always trying to protect their kids and try to prevent them from making the same mistakes, and don't do some of the wild and crazy stuff because you could get hurt. But it's gone to an extreme where millennials are extremely risk averse, and that can really hurt in a lot of ways, because that's where entrepreneurship comes from. That's where investment comes from. There's a certain amount of risk that's involved. Trying new careers and new ideas and opening businesses, this takes a certain amount of risk tolerance. And so if we have a whole generation that is extremely risk averse, that could really hold us back. So I am concerned about that. And I think this is indicated by the whole thing about safe spaces. And I'm not going to badmouth safe spaces as a concept, because maybe the term is new, but we've always had, this kind of thing where, we have situations where people are able to, get together in a tight group that's private, separate, whether it's based on, uh, sex, gender, common interest, whatever it was, and allowed people to discuss their issues and do their thing away from people who weren't part of that, and you know, so that they could converse without being harassed or stuff. And it's nearly not new. So when people attack it, I think they're being unfair. But I think the wording is what a lot of people get kind of irritated at, and sometimes I do too. But I think it's really, for me, just the fact that it's this indicator of this massive risk aversion. And the thing is, life is full of risk. What matters is how we mitigate risk and how we deal with it as they come up. And so that has a big concern for me. The other thing about millennials that bother me, I have, as an employer, I've employed a number of co-op students, paid positions. I don't believe people should work for free, but I find that they're, Sword Sage said something about them, being, inflexible. And part of, in addition to being intellectually inflexible, there's also kind of a egocentrism that I think is not, maybe seems to me bigger than past generations. You're coming in, I don't know how many times, I can't count how many times I've had one come in late, which things happen. I run late too sometimes. But they don't call. They don't seem to. Not only do they not call out of courtesy to just say, "Hey, look, I'm running behind, and I'll be in whenever it's going to be," or "I'm going to be out today because something came up." They just don't show up. and this isn't just one person. This is a number of people. I've had, I don't know, probably 6 different co-op students, and they've all done the same thing. We had somebody today who was a no-show for an interview. Ended up calling only at 5:30, and that was after we told the coordinator at the school that they were a no-show, and that person called them and told them that they needed to call us and apologize. So, that's something that bothers me. As an employer, I mean, the lack of respect for somebody else's time. When you're on somebody else's time. That's concerning. So, but that, and I have some other things I'll get to, but so that's where I am on millennials. Now, on the flip side, I got just as many problems with the baby boomers because I mentioned that protective thing. Well, that came from the baby boomers. The baby boomers will attack millennials about the participation trophies. But where'd those come from? They came from baby boomers, and at least initially, they started that stuff with us, with the Gen Xers, uh, at a lower level, but it's amped up over time, and unfortunately, my generation has continued the practice, so it's really not good. So it's not surprising to me that you have a generation of people who kind of expect accolade and expect, you know, everything to be concerned about them when we spent their whole lives treating them that way. Well, what do you expect? So I think baby boomers and to a lesser extent Gen Xers, if we have a problem with how baby boomers act, we should look in the mirror. They just didn't do this on their own. So that's a frustration I have, and particularly with the baby boomers because they as Nathan talked about, and also Sword Sage, how they did sell out their ideals, and I think JJ talked about it a little bit too. They kind of got Activision. I won't say started. It's not that Activision didn't exist. Certainly, look at the suffragettes, but certainly they kind of got it restarted after the kind of the lull period in the 50s, and they certainly went out there and did a lot of things, but then they traded it all in for BMWs and pasta machines. So that's a problem, and now they want to look at young people and kind of point fingers, and it's like, well, think about all the stuff you did, pal. And not only did you do all the crazy stuff, and not only were you irresponsible at times, but you also helped poison the ground. You attacked the older generation, the so-called greatest generation for what they were doing as far as segregation and pollution and stuff like that. And then you joined them to make a buck. So, it's no wonder that the millennials look at you and can't take you seriously. And again, as somebody in the middle, it's been so frustrating because I've always had this thing with the baby boomers and now with the millennials, and we've just been too small to really matter. And so I'm concerned because basically to me, the millennials are the only chance we have, a coalition of Gen Xers and baby boomers, and millennials, because the baby boomers aren't likely to change. A few will. You get a really awesome person like Paul, who will. Because I think Paul is well, maybe he's Gen X, but he's kind of on the cusp there. But they're, for the most part, they're not going to change. They're going to be who they are, and the ones that are cool, great, and the ones that are not, But I want to say that I think the best thing that the millennials have probably done is Occupy Wall Street, and a lot of people in my generation, put that down. But I thought it was wonderful, and it was really great. You guys used the technology, used social media, you organized yourselves, and the only bad part was that it didn't go further. That I wish it had survived and become Occupy Congress, because I think we'd all be better off now if it had. Again, that's that thing I worry about. I worry that the millennials got disillusioned because that didn't magically transform into something, because they just weren't ready to go that next step, because there were procedural things that needed to happen, and they weren't prepared to hear what we were saying. Those of us who were on their side, that were saying to them, that committees don't work, and you need to accept leadership and take responsibility, and because you need these people to focus around. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I see the same thing with the recent election, where there was a lot of enthusiasm for Bernie, and unfortunately didn't result in votes. And so I wonder, maybe things could have been different if there had been more engagement. So, that's why I'm so desperate to find a way to make this work, because we need the millennials. If we take their energy and their ideals, because they are less racist and they are less sexist and all this, and less homophobic and less transphobic. So if we can harness that and get them to get over the hump and really step up, I think we'll be in really good shape. But we got to get there. So anyway, I think I hit on everything. Again, this is unfortunately the last take I didn't have it recording, and I missed out on what would have been a really great take. So I hope I got everything in this one. But anyway, thanks for watching, and look forward to the next topic. Take care.